Czechast, a podcast in English about Czech and Moravian society, history, culture and economy.
Hello and welcome to Czechast, the podcast in English about all things Czech. I'm Vít Pohanka. In this special episode, we are returning once again to the question of security in Europe, something that has become impossible to ignore in recent years, not only because of the war in Ukraine, but because of the broader changes in the global security environment. This time, my guest is Martin Sklenář, an analyst and co-author of a new report by GLOBSEC, an independent think tank based in Bratislava that focuses on security, geopolitics and international affairs. The report is called Annual Battle Readiness on the Eastern Flank 2026, and it looks at how prepared countries like Czechia really are to respond to any crisis. Now, this is not a personal story or a life journey in the usual Czechast sense. It's a more technical conversation about defense, decision-making, and how democracies should function under pressure. But I believe it's a very important one, because ultimately questions of security affect all of us, whether we follow them closely or not. So, let's take a closer look at Czechia's battle readiness in 2026.
Czechast, a podcast in English about all things Czech. Whether you're an English-speaking expat living in Czechia and Slovakia, or a descendant of the Czechs, Moravians and Slovaks who left for a better life in America, Australia, Britain or Canada so long ago that you don't speak the language of the old country, this podcast in English is for you.
In the report, we say the increased investments that we have seen in the past years have brought a higher level of military capabilities. That is a general trend that we see across the region. And we have looked at the countries of the eastern flank of NATO, so 10 countries from Finland to Bulgaria. We see increases in the military capability and capacity. What we wanted to see is whether the countries are actually ready to use the military capacity and capability. And for that, you need political decisions. You need decisions of, institutions, constitutional institutions, parliaments, governments, or other levels of institutions that need to decide. And for that, we looked also at the political aspects of making those decisions. And there, the situation is more diverse. Some of the countries are more able to decide quickly, and it's more predictable that they will decide on the use of military capabilities if necessary. Some countries that we put in the mid-tier, there's good foundations, but maybe the current political setup requires us to highlight some of potential friction that can happen during political deliberations about important decisions. And that's the mid-tier countries. And then we have the low-tier countries, which rather have more challenges in the political situation. Their societies are more polarized, which also brings about a more difficult situation when it comes to difficult political decisions, such as use of military force or other security and defense-related decisions. So the mid-tier countries are countries who are institutionally and from the aspects of legislation very well set up. They have the institutional setup that is necessary, and we expect them to act very responsibly in situations of crisis. But due to some nuances and specificities, especially in the political level, we consider them less predictable than the higher tier countries. And therefore, we separated them from the countries who are the front runners of this group.
The report suggests that democratic safeguards and procedural complexity may hinder rapid response. Is this kind of trade-off between democracy and security, or can Czechia realistically improve decision speed without weakening democratic oversight?
It's the situation that makes it a little bit more challenging for democracies. There's a lot of deliberation, discussion, and procedure to be done before we take decisions of this nature, which is perfectly fine, because this is the nature, that this is what we expect from the institutions, that they take into account all the values and the principles that we want to protect in democracies. What we were looking into is that countries could actually find some ways of speeding up the discussion or the procedures or the process to arrive at the decisions that will be or could be necessary in a time of crisis. Not at the expense of democratic principles and norms. No, those can be all protected and guaranteed even in a faster procedure. But there might be opportunities to do things a little bit differently, focusing more on the speed of the procedure of the decision making.
Czechia is described in your report as a kind of industrial and innovation stronghold of NATO's eastern flank. How important is this role for overall deterrence, and does it compensate in any way for weaker operational readiness?
Well, that's Czechia has put itself in the forefront of European defense industry. This is the part that we are talking about right now. It's not compensating. Basically, what we argue is that the defense industry is a core element of defense readiness and the deterrence that is necessary to keep peace in Europe and stability. You have to show not only that you have strong militaries, so that you can use it, that you can deploy it, that you can decide on the use of the military, but you also have to show that you have the capacity to keep up the fight as long as necessary. And this is where the industry comes into play. The capacity and quick adaptation of the industry is something that we consider to be very much part of the overall calculation that potential adversaries have to take into account when they think about their potential aggressive actions. So it's not a compensation; it's a very important part of the deterrence. But it adds a lot of value to the kind of quality that we want to see, and not only in Czechia but also in other countries, because this is a Europe-wide effort that we have to do with regard to the industry.
Now, there is no secret that we've got a government for a few months now that doesn't seem to be very much invested into investment into defense in general, to say the least. I understand that this is still quite a short time, and probably this will take some time to see where they really go. Nevertheless, they do mention, the present government mentions some reforms, that need to be done in this respect when it comes to security. From your perspective, what are the, let's say, 3 most urgent reforms that Czechia should implement to perhaps improve its standing and move to the top performance when it comes to readiness?
Well, we see that the top performers that we have identified in our reports, the one thing that is in common is that they have a strong support from the population for issues of security and defense, and this only comes from good awareness campaigns, having an open and frank exchange with the population about the nature of the threat, the urgency of the threat, and what is necessary to do in reaction to the threat, so that the quality of life and the way of life that the people are used to can be preserved. Because this is not something that, the Czech government or somebody else on the European Union side has chosen. Somebody else has decided that they're going to start a war in Ukraine. And this has changed our security situation considerably. And if you have this kind of discussion with your population, then it opens up your political options to do some of the decisions that are very important, but maybe less popular, usually with the population. You have to create the basis to have this. So I would advise to have a very open and frank discussion with the population, a campaign that the government runs using, all kinds of credible institutions and representatives, as we have seen, for example, in Germany or Sweden or Finland, also beyond the eastern flank, countries that do discuss difficult issues with their populations and have a good basis. Also, what we see is that the level of defense investment, that's the second point, the level of defense investment simply needs to be at the level that NATO has agreed in the summit on the summit in Hague last year, which is 3.5% of GDP for the core military spending and 1.5 for the dual use or support infrastructure and projects, which makes sense because this is not an arbitrarily set number. This is a number that represents the plans. It represents the outcome of a 3-year-long process that we have done in NATO, starting with the threat identification and assessment, operational planning, and then setting the military minimum military requirements that are necessary to be at the level to deter a potential adversary, in this case Russia. And when you when you financially express the requirements for sourcing the operational plans, you arrive at the 5% of GDP that is necessary to cover the requirements. So if a country is spending less than the 3.5% or even less than the 2% of GDP, it puts itself in a situation where other allies have to come up with more investments to cover the part that is supposed to be covered, for example, by Czech Republic or by Slovakia. And also, if the country spends less on the military modernization and creating and building more capability, it basically falls behind in the overall development. Other countries who invest more, they build more capacity and capability. So the country who becomes the one lagging behind is basically more of a target for anybody who would be considering a potential armed operation in Europe. They would choose the countries who invest less into their military. And the third is the relationship with the industry, of course, and the speed with which governments have to be able to procure new military capabilities. This requires a completely new setup between the government and industry, very close relationship, just to make sure that the government is always buying the most innovative and most modern technology that is available, and that it's buying it at a time that is relevant. So very quickly, given the very short innovation cycles and long procurement cycles, those two have to be reconciled to be able to provide the best possible capabilities for the military, for the armed forces in Czechia and in other countries. So this is basically the three main areas where governments, including the Czech one, should put a lot of attention right now.
Just for the listeners and just for me to make sure that I understand you well, when we talk about the top tier countries, the first thing that comes to my mind, even as a former correspondent in Warsaw in Poland, is we are talking about the countries that have a very sad historic experience with Russia mainly, which is the Baltic republics, obviously, and Poland. Is that more or less right if I say that?
It's part of the awareness of the society, right? I mean, the level of awareness is very important for us to assess how predictable the decisions will be. So in that sense, I mean, the historical experience is very important, and in Poland and in the Baltics, we see this being very much part of the society's like common understanding. Interestingly, for example, in Slovakia, we have also seen rather difficult historical times that would probably make you assess that Slovaks don't consider, for example, Russian armed forces being or representing something that they have had to go through in 1968 or whenever, which is also very painful experiences. But we don't see that kind of resilience in this society in Slovakia as we see in Poland and in the Baltics. So it's not only the history, but it's also the kind of work that you do with the population, as I have already mentioned.
That's a very good point, I think, and I'm glad that I asked you that. Back to the report, I think you partially mentioned that defense spending alone doesn't equal readiness, right? How does Czechia, or Czechia's case, illustrate this kind of gap between spending and actual operational capability?
The spending very much helps build concrete military capabilities. Not only the big ticket items like armored vehicles or jet fighters or stuff like that, but also very much the overall framework and system that is necessary for actually being able to deploy and sustain the capabilities. So there's a lot of logistics and operational costs or operational investments, if we want to call them that. But the spending has to be there not only for the platforms but also for the use of the equipment and of the capabilities. Czechia has done tremendous work in the past in terms of procuring new systems and modernizing their militaries, which basically shows a good example from the past. I mean, the level of investment has increased to 2% of GDP, which wasn't easy for anybody to do, for any other country, but it brought concrete benefits in terms of military capability. What we are seeing now, and with the concerns about not keeping this kind of level of investment, we see that, or we would expect that there would be not only losing the trend or the tempo in the modernization, but also it could bring potential problems with the operation of the equipment that comes in. Right? I mean, if you buy the new equipment, you don't want to see very expensive jet fighters or armed vehicles standing on the yard somewhere. You want to see them being used for training, for show of force kind of exercises, just to make sure that you use the equipment to work on the deterrence and on making sure that the interoperability and other functions of the collective defense framework can be kept up. So this is the risks that we see, not only losing the tempo in modernizing the equipment, but also having more challenges when it comes to the use of the new equipment.
Again, the report argues, I think, at least I hope I read it correctly, that the real dividing line in Europe when it comes to defense and security is no longer East versus West, but fast versus slow responders. Am I correct in this? And if yes, where does Czechia fit into this new kind of security map? And what are the implications for NATO's collective deterrent?
I wouldn't put it as there's a dividing line, because there's certainly countries who can do quicker and faster decisions, and there's countries.
But it's not like a line.
Yeah,
there are countries here and there, if I understand correctly.
But certainly the time is now the most important resource that countries need. There is a very strong sense of urgency in terms of building up the necessary capabilities and using them if necessary to make sure that we can maintain the quality of life and the way of life that we are used to, and the time pressure, the urgency puts really a premium on fast decisions and lean decision making procedures. So it's not a dividing line, but it's something that really differentiates the countries on a spectrum, and it's not like the lower tier countries are not able to deliver. They are able to deliver, but it takes a little bit longer, which might be a liability or even a risk in situations where quick decisions will be necessary.
Finally, if a crisis were to emerge, especially in this area on NATO's eastern flank tomorrow, what would you see as the biggest kind of vulnerability in Czechia's current readiness posture, and how quickly could it realistically be addressed?
If a crisis were to happen, this would be already something that we haven't seen, right? So there's a little bit of an unknown here. But what we see also with the lessons learned that we see from Ukraine and from other countries, I would put it this way. I mean, to be as much ready as possible for a day like that, There's certainly all the investments into defense that need to happen, but also there's changes in the legislation that need to happen to make sure that the country is able to react quickly when the crisis occurs, right? And if you see that there might be challenges to make decisions fast as the crisis develops, you want to preload the decisions and make as much of those decisions, of those difficult decisions, as early as possible before the crisis occurs. So you can identify measures that measures or tools that the government has at its disposal, probably in times of higher crisis or higher crisis levels. Almost, like in the Slovak or similarly also in the Czech legislation, you have the state of war or war, where the government can mobilize obviously more resources. Some of that in the current times you need to do also in peacetime or in low levels of crisis buildup. And this is now the time to look into what are the measures that maybe deserve a discussion about whether the government can introduce them in lower levels of crisis, right? For example, like deploying military equipment in private lands, or what is the possibility of the military using some of like local authorities' infrastructure. Situations like that would actually help prepare for the very short time, very close to the outbreak of a military conflict, and which would make the situation even better. I mean, there's a whole bunch of military capability gaps that we know NATO as a whole or Europe as a whole has. One of them is the air defense capability, which certainly deserves a lot of attention and a lot of money and investment to generate more capacity to be able to protect more populations and more territory of the Czech Republic, but also of other countries. In this case, the eastern flank has a little bit of an advantage because the limited number of system for ground-based air defense, for example, that are available for NATO are already moved into the region to be able to react quickly if the situation requires that. But I mean, there's there's many other areas that also deserve attention, like cyber capabilities or even electronic warfare preparedness for potential remotely piloted or even autonomous systems that might be making their ways into NATO territory. So it's rather a list of capabilities, but in the military sense, with the investments that have been planned or that countries have agreed to in the summit in The Hague, this should be progressively covered, and the gaps should be closing down, right? One important thing that we also would like to stress here with the report is that the readiness and the deterrence doesn't start in Brussels or doesn't come from Brussels. It's not possible to go to Brussels or The Hague or any other place for a NATO summit, agree to a commitment, and the readiness comes from there. No, you have to come back to the national capital and basically implement the commitments, the political commitments that you have made to and with your allies, to make sure that the country and all the other countries in the collective defense system are ready when the situation requires it to act in unity and at the level of resolve that will be necessary.
Martin Sklenář of GLOBSEC, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
That was Martin Sklenář, analyst and co-author of the Annual Battle Readiness on the Eastern Flank 2026 report by GLOBSEC. If you're interested in exploring the topic in more detail, the full report, running to more than 140 pages, is available online. You can find key takeaways, summaries, and download the complete study on the GLOBSEC website at globsec.org. If you'd like to hear more episodes and stories that concern Czechia, make sure you follow Czechast on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps me to prepare more episodes like this one. I'm Vít Pohanka. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay curious, and as we say in Czech, naslyšenou.
Czechast, a podcast in English about all things Czech. Whether you're an English-speaking expat living in Czechia and Slovakia, or a descendant of the Czechs, Moravians and Slovaks who left for a better life in America, Australia, Britain or Canada so long ago that you don't speak the language of the old country, this podcast in English is for you.